Hello friends, I'm Aftab from Easy Approach, and in this video we are going to make a simple but very interesting application, which is a URL shortener application. You might have used the websites that actually converts a long URL into a shorter one. So basically we are trying to mimic such type of application as a Flutter application. So what I'm doing, this is actually the application interface, the UI actually, and you just need to paste here the URL that's actually the long URL, and you want to convert it into a shorter one. So let's get a long URL. So here it is, a long URL, and what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna paste it here. Okay, so I just need to click on this get link, and you can see it has created for me the short URL. And if I tap on it, you can see the link is copied now, and this is the actually web page that I converted. So if I go using the short URL, this should take me to the same page, and you can see it's taking me to the same page actually. So the API that we are going to use for converting the long URL into a shorter one is this cleanuri.com, and it is actually providing us the post request with this endpoint. So you just need to call this endpoint. It's totally free. You don't need to get the key. You don't need to have the authorization stuff, the token or anything. It's completely free. You just need to access this endpoint. You just need to hit the API, which is the post request, and you need to post the URL parameter with the API, and in the URL you just need to pass the long URL. So we are going to use this post request. Let's start the development of this application. So I have done some code to save the time. It's just the UI and not the functional things. So let's start from the project structure. I have created a screens folder in which I have just one screen, because the application would have only one screen, which is this screen that you can see currently on the emulator. So I've named it URL_shortener_screen. So you can see I have given the reference of this screen in the material app widget, and in the home I have given this widget. So let's go in this widget. So this is basically this screen that you are currently watching on the emulator. So it is just a stateless widget. We are not using a stateful widget because we are definitely going to use provider basically and change notifier for state management. So we don't really need to have a stateful widget here. So as we do often, or as we do always, we started from the scaffold, which is actually the base or the root widget of this URL shortener screen. And after it, I have used a container so that I can apply some padding. So I have applied padding of 32 pixel around the whole content that's inside the container, and I've given the maximum width to this container. Now let's see what we have in the column widget. So first of all, I have a text widget in which I have just given a simple text URL shortener, and I've done some styling, like increasing the text size, giving some color, and increasing the weight of the font. And then I have another text, which is basically this is a smaller one, which is shorten your long URL quickly, and I've also given the text color to it. Then we have a 32 pixels vertical space, and then we have after it we have a text field, and we have some basic decoration, like I've applied an outline input border so that I can have curve like feeling in the text field, and I've also filled the text field with grayish color with 200 value, and you have to have this filled property true in order to fill the text field with the color. And at the last I have some hint text so that I can let user know what he has to give in this text field. After it, we have some space so that it creates even a space between basically it creates the space between the next widget, which is wrapped button inside the container. So we have a flat button, and I have given a text on the button that is just get link. Whenever the user would hit on this button, we will get the text from the text field, and we will fire the API for getting the shorter length link, and then we will display it after the text field So we don't have the text widget right now below the text field, but we will surely gonna have it. So inside the on press, I have nothing. It's just empty, but we will definitely going to work in this. Now let's see what are the dependencies we need to have in pubspec.yaml file in order to complete this application. So basically I have copied a couple of dependencies that I need to paste after cappuccino icons. So we are going to have provider in this application for the dependency injection and also for the state listener. And we have HTTP package that we will use for calling the API, and we are actually going to call HTTP post request in order to get the shorter version of the long URL. And I have already told you what API we are actually going to use, and we will see it further when we will create the future for getting the shorter length URL. So let's start from the very first thing, or the very essential thing, which is the state for this screen. So as I said, I'm using basically provider for state management. So I'm gonna have change notifier instance as a state of this screen. So before creating the state, let's click on this get dependencies, because we have pasted some lines of code in pubspec.yaml file, and we should get the dependencies first so that it installs all the dependencies and we can use it. So now what we have to do, we have to create the state for this basically screen. So because this is the only screen, so we are going to have just one state for this screen. So we can name it URL Shortener state, and this is gonna be the instance of change notifier. So we will basically make some ordinary class and we will extend it to change notifier. So let's give it a name, URL Shortener state, and then we will extend it to change notifier, not provider, just change notifier. Okay, so okay. And now to use this state of class actually in the whole application, or more specifically in this screen, in URL shortener screen, we first need to inject this URL shortener state into the very top level of the widget tree of the application. So what I'm gonna do, basically, I'm gonna wrap this my app widget with change notifier provider, and then in the change notifier provider, we have a property create. So here we will create the instance of the change notifier actually, which is URL shortener state. But we first have to write here braces, sorry, round bracket and then context, and we have to close this, and then we have to return the instance of the state, which is the instance of the change notifier. And then we will be able to use this change notifier instance throughout the application, because we have injected this dependency at the very top level of the widget tree of this application. Now let's make the UI functional, and let's make things actually functional, so that we can, if we click on this get link, it should take the value from this text field, and it hits the API, and then it gets the shorter URL. So firstly, what I have to do, I'm going inside the state class, and what I have to do, I have to make the functionality that I can get the text, whatever the text user will put in this text field, I can get the text from the text field. So for it, we have a couple of options to get the text from text field. What I'm doing right now is I'm having a text editing controller in the state file, and I will associate the controller with this text field so that I can get the text from this text field whenever I want. So let's create final, and let's give it a name, URL controller, and it will be instance of text editing controller. Okay, that's great. And now we have to associate this URL controller to this text field. So let's go in the URL shortener screen, and let's first we need to get the reference of the injected state file or injected state class, which is change notifier instance. So basically we are using a provider for this. So we can write the code. Final state equals to provider.auth, and here you have to specify the type of the change notifier instance that you want to get, and then you have to specify the context. And if you want to listen to the changes which is actually happening in the URL shortener state class, so you can keep this listen to true. That's great. And now what we have to do, we have to associate the controller with the text field. So here's the code for the text field, and inside it we have the property controller, and we can get the controller, which is text editing controller, from the state file, because we have already gotten the reference of the state. So you can just write a state, and then inside it we have URL controller. So this is how we can associate the URL controller with the text field. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna create a method which is handle get link button. So it will be responsible for handling the on press which will happen on this button. So what it will do, it will get the text from the text field, and it will hit the API, will get the response, and it will show at the actually below this text field. So first of all, let's get the text from the URL controller. So let's name it long URL, and this will be URL controller.text. And then we are going to have a method which will be actually a future, and in which we will pass the long URL string, and it will actually return the string data, actually the short URL. So right now we don't have this method or this future, but we are going to create it. And as this would be a future, we have to have a wait keyword, and since we are using a wait keyword, we need to have this async. So you can see it's giving error because we don't have this get short URL link future. So let's create this. So as I said, this will be a future that will return a string. So now we will make the HTTP call. So before making HTTP call, we have to import http.dart, and we have to give some alias, because this http.dart contains futures. So giving the alias, we can access all these futures just by writing the name http dot, and then we can get all the future that's actually defined in this http.dart file. So because we have to make the post request, and let's open the documentation where we have to actually hit the API. So it's actually the base URL, and this is the endpoint, which is underscore API v1 shorten, and this is actually post request, and you can just post URL and with the long URL, and it will return you the response having result underscore URL, and it would have short link. So let's write the code for making the HTTP post request. So it will be final result, and we have to use await, because all the futures that's actually defined in this http.dart for making HTTP calls are actually future. So we need to have a wait keyword before the future so that we can get the value from the future. And then we can access the http.post future by writing the alias, and you can see it contains the future which is get and post. So we have to use post. And here we have to specify the URL where we have to hit the API. So it should contain the base URL as well as the endpoint. So first it should have https:// and then the base URL is this cleanuri.com. So let's copy this. And then after it, we have to specify the endpoint. So this is the endpoint. So we can just paste it. And then as this is post request, and we have to post the URL data with this request. So how you can do it, you can simply use body, and inside the body you can just specify the map. So the keyword, let's minimize this. You can see if I open the documentation again, so the parameter that we have to send is actually URL. So we have to send URL and we have to give its value. So we have the value already, which is long URL. Okay, that's great. So now after making the HTTP request, we need to check the status, so whether it's actually successfully run or not. So for checking it, what we can do, we can simply use result.status code and we can compare it to 200, because if it is 200, then it means it's successfully completed. And we can also print whatever we get in the response. So you can get the response by response.body, and in the else, if it is not 200, it means there is some problem. Then we can simply paste the response and we can just print on the console that there is some error. And now what we can do, okay, right now we are not actually returning a string data, but for now just I'm returning just empty string, but we will surely return some meaningful data that is that will be actually short URL or the error string in case of when we get error. So because we have already printed on inside this future, we don't really need to print or use this short URL right now, because we are not actually printing or returning some meaningful data. So let's call this handle get link button method on the on press. So that's great. And now let's reopen the application and see what we are getting in the response. So the application is restarted and I'm actually going to open some URL, which will be a long URL. So I'm actually going in my YouTube studio and I'm looking for some video. Not actually, I don't really need to go in. So this is my channel and let's open any of the video. So this is actually the URL. It's not really long, but let's start with this and let's paste this. Okay, so we have actually pasted it, and now let's click on get link. It should show something on the console. Okay, so it is successfully completed and we are actually getting this response. So that's great. So what I'm gonna do now, because we are actually now getting the response, now we have to parse this response and we need to get this result URL property, the value actually, and we need to show it after the text field so that it looks great. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna copy this response and I'm gonna create a model class for this. Even though it's a pretty small response, it doesn't really require the model class, but still, so that we can keep things clear and you can extend it further. So I'm actually using quicktype.io, so it actually creates or generates the model class for the response that you provided. So what we can do, we can give it what we are URL shortener response. So I'm actually giving the name of this model and you have to paste the response, and then simply this is the file, this is the code that you need to paste in the model class file. So we need to create the model file. So let's create a model folder, and inside it let's create the URL shortener model response model. And let's paste the whole code here. Okay, that's great. Now what we have to do, we have to parse the response that we are getting in the state file. In the future, actually, we have to parse the response rather than just printing it on console. So what we can do, we can use this URL shortener response from JSON method to convert. So let's name it response, and it should be equals to URL shortener response from JSON, and inside it you can just pass result.body. And then what you can do, you can simply return the error, sorry, the short URL actually. So this is result URL, response.result URL. And in case if we get any error, we can just we can also return the error string from the backend that we are actually getting from the server in the response. But right now what I'm doing, I'm just printing some hard-coded error message. So there is some error in shortening the URL. Okay, so that's great. That's great actually. And what we can do now, okay, so what we can do, we need to have the text field, sorry, only the text widget after this text field, so that we can show the result or the short URL. So I'm gonna do some addition in the code for the screen. So after the text field, I'm gonna have some vertical spacing. So let's create a vertical spacing of 16 pixels, and after it, let's create a text, and it will get the text from the state file. So initially the string would be, okay, so let's name it short URL, and initially it would be some short URL message. So initially it would be like give some long URL to convert, something like this. So this would be initial a message when the user hasn't actually given the long URL, but once he gives the URL and we call the get short URL link, and we get the short URL, then we will update this message to simply the short URL. So let's do it something like this. That's great. And then we need to call, because whenever we have to update some state data, we need to call the notify listener so that it updates the UI also. So that's great. Okay, so we need to give the reference of the text, which is short URL message here, and that's great. So if I run the application again, so you can see right now it's showing the message give some long URL to convert, because we haven't right now given the long URL. But once I paste the long URL, oh, it actually pasted the whole response. I have to again go back to my channel and copy the link. And how I can remove this all. Okay, now if I paste the long URL, which is not actually the long URL, but still, if I click on get, you can see it's now showing the short URL link. And what we can do to make it more better, we can make this text copyable, or basically the user can copy when he taps on this link. So let's write the code for it also. So basically we need to wrap this text widget to gesture detector so that we can detect the tapping event on it. And if a user tap on it, we can simply copy this URL to the clipboard. So for copying the text to the clipboard, we have clipboard dot set data. Inside it we can write clipboard data, and in the text we can just simply pass the text to be copied. So this is short URL message. And as it's a future, once it is completed, we can simply show some snack bar to indicate user that the URL is copied now and you can use it anywhere you want. So what we can do, we can show a snack bar. So let's write scaffold dot off context show a snack bar, and here you can pass the snack bar. In the content we can pass text widget, link is copied. Okay, so let's format it, and now let's refresh it, or we can just simply hot reload it since it's just a UI part. So if I tap on it on the URL, okay, so it's giving some error. So actually it's because the context that we are actually passing is the context of this build. So it's actually before the scaffold. So we need to have the context that is below the scaffold. So we can do a trick here. We can simply wrap this widget into a builder widget. And then we have the property which is builder, and we can simply write here context, and then we can return the gesture detector. And this should now work, because now the context that we are using is actually the context that we get from the context that we get from the builder, and it's after the scaffold. So it should now work. Let's refresh it, and now if I tap on it, you can see now it's saying the link is copied now. And if I go to copied now, and if I go to some Now if I go to browser and if I just click on paste, you can see it's showing actually the URL, which is the shorter URL, and if I go on this link, it will open my video that I actually used to convert a long URL into a shorter one. So this is how you can make a small application. It's actually includes the API request, which is the post request, and you guys always request me to make videos on API. So I hope this will help, and it also contains some basic of state management with providers. So it's actually a basic application, but it's still it covers a lot of things that you can extend and make a more practical application, more dynamic application with more functionality. So this is it from this video. If you like the video, please give a big thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed the channel, please subscribe the channel and share the videos with those who want to learn Flutter with easy approach. So thank you for watching.